Sharon Harrigan's debut novel, Half, features twins Artis and Paula and their complicated relationship with their father. The girls are named for the Greek gods Artemis and Apollo, and they seem to perceive their own father as an all-powerful mythic Zeus figure, part god and part monster. This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. In the novel Half, Sharon Harrigan uses an interesting strategy of a single narrative point of view, a first-person plural, for the twin protagonists Artis and Paula as they tell their story about growing up in Michigan and the extraordinary situations involving their father. We follow their lives through childhood, adolescence, college, and into their own adulthood. Secrets fill the lives of Artis and Paula throughout these years, and as we will see, explode when they are adults returning to their hometown to attend their father's funeral. We spoke to Sharon Harrigan about her novel, Half. In writing about twins, and writing about twins from a single point of view, that's really different. What made you want to tell the story this way?
It grew from a short story with the same name, and it came from an autobiographical moment in my life, even though the book itself is mostly not autobiographical, which is this moment when my brother and I, who are not twins, he's a year and a half older than me, when we were 5 years old, just like the twins in my novel at the beginning, and we used to pretend to be babies. And we would say, "I'm half. How old are you?" "I'm half too," meaning I'm 6 months old. So there was this idea of being so young and yet playing at the idea of being even younger. Like, how young can you be and still be nostalgic for a simpler time? So it started out, with that word, really, half. And then they half understand everything. They, of course, half don't understand everything. So it's this misunderstanding, the way children do misunderstand, not really understanding what's real, what's not real. And yes, as you said, they're both of them are like two halves of one whole. And I tried to take that metaphor and make it literal by giving them a single voice. They speak as we.
But I just love this idea of babyfying things, looking back as they do in a way when they look at the mother with her daycare that she runs out of the house, where she sees, where the two girls see how the mother loves on these babies. And so I see also this quality of magic in everything that the girls are perceiving. I mean, they're still young, but they're not as young as babies. And yet we're in this mindset where everything is made, everything's sort of imbued with this shine and this magic quality. I don't know, there's just something about it that actually draws you into this twin world. Scholars often have said that twins, like twins in Shakespeare, for instance, are inherently comical. And I get that. And there is some of that here too, only in ways, I suppose, that there's this uncanny sort of quality that I think changes our sense as readers of what we sort of see as ordinary. Did you find that in writing too, like this quality in the twins that wasn't just comical, but that was so special in how uncanny?
Yeah, and you speak as if you know something about
Right? I'm a twin. I'm a twin to a boy, and it's a very different kind of twinship. But I still swear that that there are these uncanny features to our relationship.
Yeah, and I'm well aware that every twin relationship is different from the other, just like every sibling relationship is different from the other. So I've had some twins read my book and say, "Yes, this is exactly what it feels like," and I have also had some who said, "No, it's not really quite like that for me." So I don't pretend to represent all twin relationships. This is one particular twin relationship, and it's kind of also, it's literal, but it's also supposed to, for me, represent just siblings in general. that the sibling relationship, we share so much, both the genes and environment. Who else is closer than that? And I was just so intrigued by this idea of how close can you be to someone else. And so, of course, I thought, well, not just siblings, but siblings who are twins are really close. And how can I explore both the absurd and comical um, parts of that intimacy that you kind of push to its logical extreme, but also explore the beauty and the tragedy, and also this kind of metaphor for our divided selves. I had one writer who described my book in a way that I'm going to, if you'll humor me, I'm going to quote what she says because it really made a lot of sense to me. And she said that half is about what it means to be an angry, hurt, ambitious girl divided against herself, estranged from others, and unsure how to weigh the violence she's experienced with the alliances she needs. Mm. So I also think of the twin as sort of being a metaphor for the two halves that we each have of ourselves.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. It must be so gratifying at the same time to hear from other twins say that this is so accurate. I mean, of course, it can't be a universal twin experience that you're depicting here. So I appreciate that. But you did a lot of research for this novel about twins.
Mm-hmm, I did, yeah. So one of the books that I loved that really spurred me on was a memoir by Krista Paravani called Her. And if you haven't read it, you should read it. It's about her experience with her identical twin. And they were very close. They were both visual artists, and her twin actually ended up committing suicide in her early 20s. And the closeness of that relationship and having to really feel like half of you is missing. The way she described it was so palpable and kind of magical. And both the way that she described their closeness when her sister was alive and then that missing half when she was gone really spoke to me. And I was kind of following that spirit in my novel.
I do appreciate what you said about how this could really be a story about just the individual self with these two sides. I mean, the girls' bond, their bond is so deep, but one of the features of their bond has to do with this idea of fending off their abusive father and fretting over their mother, who's sort of this other victim of the father's control. And it's sort of like they're not two against one in that battle or in that equation. It's almost like one artist looks over at Paula and just to sort of say, is this really happening? I mean, because there are some very severe things that occur to the girls at the hands of their father. And then there's a question, right, about did this really happen? And I don't want to spoil anything for folks who are going to pick up this book after they hear this interview, but there is this bond with the girls that seems to be most elemented for us by way of how they deal with their parents.
Yeah, and that came from my life too, because I didn't have the same traumatic experience that my characters have, but I did have a traumatic experience. When I was 7 years old, my father died in a mysterious, bizarre accident that it took me until I was an adult to figure out what really happened. And so my brother and I, he was just a little bit older than me, I was 7, we didn't understand it, and people kind of wanted us to respond in some way or say what we were feeling, and we couldn't. And I felt like the two of us together could just be together and just know what the other was feeling and not have to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of, as I think back on it, felt like we were reading each other's minds, but we were really just kind of quietly being together and knowing that we'd both experienced the same thing and that we didn't have to explain to each other. And I think trauma sort of protecting yourselves because a traumatic event happened. I think it can make people closer, especially children. And so, and I think a lot of children, unfortunately, do go through trauma in their early lives. So this was something that felt powerful to me to put in the book.
Another aspect of this to bring forth is this child's perspective. I mean, the novel takes us from the childhoods of Artis and Paula to adulthood. It's so interesting to see how the narrative changes from this kind of twinned point of view of we to the single point of view of the adults. And again, I won't spoil it, but we go with them through adolescence. And those shifts, I was just amazed going page by page of what I must tell you is a very beautiful book. I just love the layout of the book. I mean, even the paper. It's just such a gorgeous book.
Thank you so much.
It's just lovely. And so we move, and with the shifts page after page, and it's so subtle. And you just see from page to page, it's not just like these chronic angers and terrible situations that the girls are describing, or that this sort of plural singular narrator is describing, but it is moving the needle incrementally. It's just so fantastic to study that, to try to figure out how in the world you did that. But it is an unmistakable, albeit seamless, change. Was it challenging for you to write the narration this way?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things about the book was challenging. One of the things that inspired me was a movie by Richard Linklater called Boyhood, which takes place over 12 years. They actually filmed it over 12 years, starting when the title character was 6 and going until he was 18. And they're just like the epiphanies, the essential moments, the essential moments of being 8 years old, the essential moments of being 9 and 10 and 11. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to get those essential moments that move my characters forward in their lives too, and to make a coming of age that felt like you could see the movement of them growing up and separating from their parents, forming their own identities, becoming disillusioned about things, understanding reality more, separated from fantasy, all those things what it means to grow up. So I wanted to have it like that movie, move forward incrementally. But then I also wanted to have a sense that it was moving towards something, that there was a through line. And for me, that's why it's framed the way it is, that it begins with the girls as adults coming back home to Michigan for their father's funeral, and having some questions come up about what really happened in their childhood. And so those questions kind of move them forward to review their childhood. So I wanted to have sort of both this episodic feel of this is what it really feels like for a life to unfurl and for someone to come of age. But then I wanted there to be a more propulsive sense of questions at the beginning getting answered, and having that urgency of plot too. I don't know if you noticed, and maybe it's best if you didn't, that each chapter covers 1 year. So
I did.
The first chapter, they're 5, the second chapter, they're 6, etc.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying about, I feel sometimes like when we can think back on how we felt as children, like just the hours stretching out before us, like on a summer afternoon when maybe it was too hot to go outside and there was nothing to do. But it just feels like in retrospect, everything just was so ramped up with tension and meaning, right? I feel sometimes like even in this novel where the natural elements become part of some of the conflicts, some of the problems that the girls face, it seems like the sisters they're always either freezing in the snow or they're sweating in the sweltering heat. or, there's a lot here that's so tactile, that's so acutely wrapped up in sensory imagery that I think children are very open to and perceptive of. The idea that they have of their father controlling everything, including the weather, was very interesting to me. But really, I kept thinking about the child's point of view being so acutely sensitive and aware of these tactile, what's scratchy, the blanket or the pajamas or the bricks when they're standing against the brick wall. It's that this awareness of what's tactile, and then that fills out the narration so beautifully. And then even into adolescence, where it feels like the olfactory, the sense of smell is in overdrive when they're hugging a boy or something like that. I was so struck by that sort of the sensory imagery in the novel. I'm just so struck by that, how those things are, the sensory imagery is sort of infused in some of the conflicts that the girls face in just their daily lives.
Yeah, well, that was a very beautiful, close reading, and I so much appreciate it. It's what I meant, so I'm glad that it came through. Yeah, I think the visceral quality, the quality of like really being inside their bodies as well as in their heads, was something intentional, and I wanted it to give the book a mythic quality. I wanted it to be both timely in that they're living in our world right now and dealing with things that are very current, but I also wanted there to be a timeless element. And to me, the natural world and the visceral, physical quality were things that I thought would emphasize that timeless quality, and then also the sense of them, their claustrophobia in a way of kind of being this two-person unit, and kind of communicating with these physical gestures, and being so close, they're almost in the same body. That felt to me like, that was the spirit of what I was trying to get at. And yeah, there's like the sticky cherry lip gloss, and there's a lot of tactile and smell, which I think gives it a magical quality too. I'm kind of skirting on the edge, I think, between realism and magic some of the time, just the way that children do too. And my characters, even though they do grow up into adulthood, there's a sense of part of them being left in childhood.
And there is something here that makes me see that the girls, exactly as you say, are endowing their father with magical and mythological abilities. I mean, so they're named for Artemis and Apollo, and there's also this interesting idea about the father being monstrous and heroic, right? These elements of mythology here too, where he's almost like this Zeus figure and there's a reference to that, what they learn about mythology in their college course, for instance. So I'm wondering about that too, just in terms of how you were thinking about developing their story, with this timelessness, but then also sort of like this undercurrent of Greek mythology.
Yeah, I think the father can be read as a mythic figure for sure, but he can also be read as someone, who's in the news every day in our times. I mean, I think there are a number of these kind of monstrous, charismatic men, probably mostly men, but maybe women too, who have these, cult-like followings and who are magnetic and who have the ability to gaslight people, and are both kind of worshipped and reviled at the same time, or depending on who you talk to. So I wanted it like to be very steeped in our moment in time, but then also to realize that these kind of people have existed since the beginning of time, and we didn't invent this kind of sort of God monster. But then I also didn't want him to be a flat character, and I wanted there to be a sense of his humanity and a sense of the girls owing what they become to him and and becoming like him too, and having to acknowledge that what they owe him. Villains are wonderful, but they're much more interesting if they're rounded and human and have strengths and weaknesses, and if we can see ourselves in them.
I so appreciated that about both the mother and the father. They're just extremely complicated characters. I always, I think about how parents just do the best that they can. And they're not, generally speaking, these, as you say, these flat characters, these one-dimensional, one-note characters. So sometimes when the girls assumed, the father was going to remove his belt and do something terrible and show his anger, he would do the exact opposite. And they could never really predict. And sometimes that was part of the stress for them, was how unpredictable the father's character is in terms of his anger and his reactions to some of the things that the girls do. And I think that a lot of the time he was just so impressed with them because they are, again, magically these forces. They're talented in myriad ways, sort of in spite of everything. So I feel like it's all of a piece. Just the level of complexity of these characters. The mother is not just a victim. There's a lot more going on with the mother. She's just an extremely complex figure. So I just appreciate that very much about the mother and the father in this novel.
Oh, thank you. That's a really beautiful reading. I don't want to give too much away, but I really did want there 3 parts, and I kind of wanted the end, part 3, when they divide in half, for there to be a lot of surprises for the reader, because I think we often come up with these ideas that we hold so firmly about the people we know and how we grew up and what really happened, and then sometimes we kind of polish these memories so much and we don't question them. And sometimes they end up really not being that accurate. So I think it's true to life to have some surprises. And surprises often, I think, do come up when someone dies. So that's what happens in the book. At the funeral kind of is the impetus for them to look back and question and have other people, including the mother, tell them what they maybe got wrong.
There is something that happens with siblings, I think, around this notion of memory and family lore. And, what happened to whom sometimes becomes conflated. So, I find this idea very interesting in a story about twins. Who said it? Who was the one? Who was, who did this happen to? But yeah, and I think sometimes, as you say, a death in the family is what churns all that up for people who are starting to think back or wanting to look for answers or figure things out. So it's a level of complexity, as you say, in part 3, with these surprises that are exactly that, that are exactly surprises that you don't expect. But the girls have, again, not to give too much away, but it does happen, and it's just remarkable. They do have this Corsican way of existing, even when they're apart, even when they're not living together, where one can feel or perceive something that the other is going through. And I didn't think of it necessarily as magical or magic realism or I found it very normal and acceptable as reality in the novel.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, especially from someone who is a twin.
Yeah.
I did worry, of course, about writing about a group I'm not a part of. I'm not a twin. So I showed it to some people I know who are twins. And I have a friend who's a twin and who had told me about things that had happened to her, of sort of something being not in the same physical space, like, hundreds of miles away, and something happened to her sister, and she had a sense that something was wrong. And this happened, more times than would just be coincidence. So I was really intrigued by this idea. I think we have to be open to that being possibly a reality.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And another thing I wanted to show is like how people respond to twins. And a friend of mine who's a twin told me about that too, that people would sometimes act as if they're interchangeable, and this would kind of drive her crazy.
Oh, yes.
So in the first page of my book, I tell the reader, I explain how to read the book. It's in a we voice. I say, as identical twins, we spoke in the same voice. Then I say, people responded to us, at least, as if we did. So that's a pretty important distinction for me, that it's not, there's this question about how people treat twins.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm thinking now about the spelling bee. I mean, somebody had to lose. Somebody had to win. And those kinds of things that twins experience, or when they do have to separate, or they do have to make their own lives, and they have their own relationships and their own marriage and their own family, etc. So, I mean, I do think that is an important distinction to make. Now, you're the author of the memoir Playing with Dynamite.
Yes.
And now you have your novel Half. And I'm wondering about, so Half came out in 2020. I'm wondering about the pandemic in 2020 and now into this year. I'm wondering about your writing life. Has it changed at all? What's it been like to talk about Half with audiences now during the pandemic, since you had the experience pre-pandemic of talking about Playing with Dynamite? What's that been like for you?
I think all authors publishing during the pandemic have had to make a shift, a pivot online. And, online events are great, and there's a possibility of people tuning in from all over the world. So there are definitely some benefits. And I've been attending a lot of those kind of events myself and getting to hear readings that I wouldn't normally get to hear. Of course, I think we've all said that we miss the in-person. There's something about having someone come up to you at the end and the person gives you a hug, and you sign the book. So that in-person contact, I think, is something we all crave. Mm-hmm. And I'm teaching. I teach creative writing, and we pivoted online for that too. I'm looking forward to the pandemic being over and being able to do some in-person events. But it's been great. I mean, doing podcasts is really wonderful. It's I've become such a listener to podcasts too. So that's definitely something that I have done more of, and I'm so glad to be doing more of during the pandemic. But book festivals and those kinds of things are not quite the same online.
Sharon Harrigan, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for such a beautiful, close read. I really enjoyed talking to you so much.
Sharon Harrigan is the author of Half. It's published by the University of Wisconsin Press. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Bree Kirkham is our digital producer. We also had help this week from Kathleen Creedon. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.